Ladies and gentlemen, what is going on? Welcome back to For Strategy Gaming. Today we will be taking a look at a Zerg strategy, and what we will be seeing here from our player Nertio. He is who we are focusing on, and let me just acknowledge the opponent really quickly here. The opponent is EG's the Muslim. So we're going to be focusing on Nertio's play today in particular. What we will be seeing from him is some pretty standard Roach heavy play. We'll also be seeing a very standard opener as a Zerg player, starting with the pool and Extractor in your main, allowing you to get up those Zerglings before you expand, a nice and safe opener. But then as we progress into the mid game, we'll be keeping a close eye on Nertio's scouting, the constant scouting of expansions, trying to sacrifice overlords into the main to see what he has for production buildings, but also the scouting to see when and if a push is coming. And then once that push does come, we will be seeing Nertio use his roaches and dancing around force fields, because I know all of you Zerg players, or nearly all of you, have a very difficult time dealing with Protoss force fields. It's a continuous complaint that I get. So many questions about how do I deal with it. This is so frustrating. Well, the biggest thing really is, unfortunately, you basically just have to avoid them. And what is the thought process here? Well, I need those sentries to waste their energy on force fields, pull my units back, and then re-engage once those force fields dissipate and the sentries no longer have energy. That's the entire idea. That is the thought process behind it. We can see Nertio now has dropped his expansion. He's got his initial 4 Zerglings, very, very standard. We saw an Extractor steal here as well from Nertio. If you can get in that drone into the main base and steal that Extractor before he drops a second assimilator, that will certainly be a good idea. It sets them back and it puts them in kind of a certain path. They can only do so much with just that one gas. You can see, of course, trying to chase down that worker. Unfortunately, did lose one Zergling to that stalker up on the high ground. Try to avoid that if at all possible. I will slow it down momentarily. We will be taking a look at this opening build order, specifically what Nertio ended up doing. We can see continuing to send out that Overlord Scout because he will eventually want to move that into the main. But the opening build was 14 pool, 15 Extractor, then your first 4 Zerglings and Queen. Once that spawning pool does hatch, a 19 supply, the Hatchery going down at the expansion, 26 supply Roach Warren, and that is very standard play. Also coming down with the Spine at the expansion will help you just in case you see early aggression. One Spine, more than enough. Then at this point you will rely on your scouting to see if any pushes are coming. If you see no aggression, if you see no pushes, that is when you will be deciding to drone up. And let me pause here momentarily. Look at this, with that one of those initial 4 Zerglings scouting this expansion, getting dropped, and what does he do immediately after? Look at that, he starts droning right away. We can see 2 drones in production, not overcommitting to anything, just wants to kind of work on his economy at this point and continue up the scouting. Zerglings will be moving around just in case, checking that third, not very likely. At the same time, continuing to drone up. Overlord Scout getting ready to sacrifice itself. Now, something you need to do after this point, I'm going to pause quickly again. I'm loving these pauses today, apparently. I want to mention a couple things. Lair is getting morphed in here at the natural expansion. Why would you do this? In what situation would you make this decision? Well, the mentality here is, well, what does a Lair have over a Hatchery? Extra hit points. Obviously it provides you that extra tech, but one of the big things is it has extra hit points. So having the extra hit points at your expansion means it is that much more likely to survive early aggression. You have that much more time. Obviously the flip side of that is that if you lose this expansion, you lose the Lair tech. Very scary thought, but giving it that extra hit, giving it those extra hit points, it can be very helpful if you're prepared to deal with that possible loss if that situation does arise. So we saw Nertio see the expansion. He droned up at that point, sent some additional Zerglings over because he needs to continue up the scouting. But look at this. So far, there aren't even any Roaches in play, even though he got that Roach Warren. How early was it? I believe that Roach Warren came out, yes, at 26 supply. We're sitting at about 40 right now, and still no Roaches because they're not needed at this point. We're just scouting at this point. That is all that's going on. Let us pick it back up. Zerglings will be moving in for some additional scouting sometime very, very soon. The Lair is coming through, continuing up that economy focus, the drone, just continuous droning, because you can do that. As the Lair is making its way on in, that is when you will want to get your evolution chamber up, because once it's up, you want to start your upgrades for that Roach speed. And one big thing is you're going to see him continue to check this expansion, because we need to know if he is canceling it or not. The fact that we see a Fortune play is actually a good indication that it's not likely to be canceled, because there is no other reason to come out with that Forge other than kind of that level 1 upgrade and some possible cannon defense early on. Can see Nertio moving on in with the Overlord. The point of this is scouting the production buildings. We want to see, Are there any robos, and how many gateways are there? Right now, look at this. Without actually getting full walk into the base, he's got almost a precise idea of what his opponent has. You can see what Demuslim sees is, what Nurshio sees is pretty much exactly what's in the base. So yeah, there you have it. And that's exactly what Overlord Scouting can do for you. So picking it back up, Nurshio continuously checking. He just wants to confirm that the Nexus came in, because a cancel Nexus into a strong push is something to be concerned about. So keep up that Zergling Scouting. Just make sure once he sees that once he's pretty much sure it's finished, dropping down that additional hatchery, because of course, as a Zerg player, we want to be one base above our opponent. Now at this point in the game, knowing that the Protoss has expanded, they have that Forge up, what are we likely to see? Level 1 push seems very probable. So we're going to come out with the upgrades, the Roach speed coming on through, the level 1 range upgrade coming on through. Again, we saw that third base come out for obviously the extra resources, but another big part, of course, is those extra larvae. Very, very helpful. You definitely need it, definitely. That's the whole point behind it. So what we will be taking a look at right now, and this is what kind of one of the primary focuses, because I know this is such a problem for so many players, is avoiding and dancing around the force fields. Well, first and foremost, we can see Nurshio dancing around with a few roaches outside of his main, and then having rallied roaches right out to the front of his natural and third. Once an engagement comes, here is what we're focusing on. You just want to avoid these force fields. Force fields get laid down if at all possible. If it is not going to be in a situation where you will be losing everything, then you just need to pull back, let those sentries waste that energy. If you can do that, if you can dance around those force fields 1, 2, even 3 times, then all of a sudden the sentries are without energy, and when you engage, you will not have to deal with the splitting of your forces. So you can see, as much as possible, Nurshio is avoiding engaging. He's just pushing back and pulling back in, pushing forward, pulling back in, pushing forward, pulling back in, just letting those sentries waste energy. And then, now that the sentries are all relatively low, here comes the push. Moving in with all of those roaches. As soon as this aggression started, we saw Nurshio just mass-produce roaches. He cut back his droning at that point. That's precisely what you want to do, and look at that. Now force field's not nearly as much of an issue. Continuing up that roach production with his extra base, with those extra larvae, that means that many more roaches that we can afford. And if you can fend off a strong push like this, that level 1, usually a 6 to 7 gate push is what you will see from a Protoss player. If you can fend that off, you will be sitting in a very good position. And if necessary, what is Nurshio doing? Pulling down with drones. What does this do? It distracts fire, provides a little bit of extra damage. You can see some of those stalkers attacking the drones instead of the roaches, and that is a good thing because it lets your roaches live that much more longer and lets them do that much more damage. And that's precisely the idea. That is the point. That is the mentality. We're going to see right now Nurshio fending off this push entirely with those roaches, and actually Demuslim does call GG. Now, this isn't necessarily going to win you the game. This was pretty standard play from Nurshio in terms of his opener and everything that he did, his scouting, his responses to what he saw. Everything was fairly standard, but what we really want to focus on was just his use of roaches, avoiding those force fields, forcing those sentries to use up their energy, and then engaging once they are relatively low with a roach-heavy army. That's a great defense against this type of level 1 6-gate push, I believe is what it was exactly. What do we have here? It looks like 6. Yes, so it was a 6-gate level 1 push here from Demuslim, and we saw just how effectively Nurshio was able to fend it off with some nice force field dancing. So let me go into the build order specifically that we did see Nurshio use this game. It was, again, a standard opener for a Zerg player against a Protoss opponent. We saw 14 pool, 15 extractor, the first 4 Zerglings and your queen. 19 supply was the Hatchery at that expansion. 26 supply was that Roach Warren. Then scouting, check for the expansion, check what your opponent's doing. We saw the Roach Warren come down, 26, and then 39 supply was when the Lair came out. As we talked about, having a Lair at your expansion gives that extra boost in health. You can see right now the Lair sits with 2,000 health as opposed to the Hatchery, which is just a 1,500. So that extra 500 health can definitely make the difference, but also just be wary of the fact that if you lose this, losing Lair tech is a pretty big deal as well. So there you have it, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And as always, guys, keep watching and keep owning.